Hi everyone, this is Teacher Rathel, and today I will be discussing about implementing portfolio assessment. Portfolio assessment is a purposeful, systematic process of collecting and evaluating student assessments to document progress toward the achievement of learning targets. After completing the planning stage for portfolio assessment, we now begin the process of actually implementing or using the portfolios with our students. This begins with explaining to students what portfolios are and how they will be used. Here is a checklist for implementing and using portfolios according to Macmillan 2018. We ask these questions. Are students knowledgeable about what a portfolio is and how it will be used? Do students know why portfolios are important? Do students have the necessary technical skills to use a digital portfolio? Technical skills such as those used in navigating an online application or program. Are the students responsible for or involved in selecting the content? Are there a sufficient number of work samples, but not too many? Is the table of contents included? Are specific self-evaluation questions provided? Is the checklist of contents complete? Are scoring criteria for individual items and entire contents clear? Are individualized teacher-written comments provided? And are student-teacher conferences included? So these are some considerations we have to take note when implementing and using portfolios. The next step after determining students' self-reflective guidelines and scoring criteria in the planning stage is to review with students. Because some students may not be familiar with portfolios, teachers need to explain carefully what is involved and what students will be doing. Begin with explaining the learning targets. Then show examples of student portfolios that display quality work and give students opportunities to ask questions. Second is to supply the portfolio content. It will be helpful to provide guidelines about the nature of the works to be included. We also have to ask questions such as who selects the content of the portfolio? Is it the student or is it both the teacher and the student? An effective approach is for students and teachers to decide together what to include. If students are given the opportunity to decide on what to include in their portfolio, they tend to develop this sense of ownership. Another approach is to give students some restrictions or limitations and include student explanations as to why they choose such content pieces. For example, the teacher might prescribe the categories of writing samples, such as poem, persuasive essay, and technical report, and students would select within each of these categories. But regardless of who makes the selections, there need to be clear guidelines for what is included, when it should be submitted, and how it should be labeled. In terms of the number of samples of student work, the general rule of thumb for documentation portfolio is to add one artifact every week or two for a total of 10 to 15 different items for the year. For showcase portfolios, as few as 3 samples may be enough, and a final product or project may be represented with 1 sample. For working portfolio, students keep most of their work, including the drafts. And for display or final portfolio, selections are made from the working portfolio. Hartle suggests a value-added approach in which students include only those samples that contribute to understanding how the student has improved or progressed. Student or teacher may ask the question, what value is added by each content piece or each piece of evidence? If a content piece doesn't contribute something new, then it is not included. And to organize the portfolio, it is suggested that we include a table of contents that can be expanded with each new entry. Typically, a table of contents is developed after all content pieces have been arranged. And the table, which should be located at the beginning part of the portfolio, should include a brief description, date produced, date submitted, and date evaluated. The next step in implementing our portfolio or student portfolio is the student self-reflection. Most students may have little experience with creating or developing their reflections. So one step that we can use is to get students be comfortable with simple and non-threatening forms of self-reflection. And we can do this with the use of teacher modeling and teacher critics. Once students understand what is involved by seeing examples of student work from the previous unnamed students, then they can begin to engage in their own reflections orally with each other. A good way to introduce students to self-reflection is to have them label various content pieces as best work, most creative, most difficult, most effort, most fun, and most improved. The next step could be the use of specific items to structure student evaluations. For example, we can have incomplete statements such as, if I could show this piece to anyone, I would pick blank because blank. The piece that was my biggest challenge was blank because blank. And one thing that I have learned from doing this piece is that I blank. With these incomplete statements, then students are able to structure their own self-reflection statements. Questions can also be asked to give students less structure in how they respond. For example, we have questions such as, what did you learn from writing this piece? What would you have done differently if you had had more time? What are your greatest strengths and weaknesses in this sample? So self-reflection responses are helpful because they are insights into how involved students have been in reaching the learning target, what the students perceive to be their strengths, and how instruction can be tailored to meet their needs. And here is an example of a middle and high school student responses to self-reflection questions. This example was adapted from Macmillan 2018. We have the first question. Why did you select this particular piece of writing? The responses include, this is my best piece of the year, clearly the strongest. I put more effort in this paper than any of the others. You can see how much detail is included and how many references I used. So students are able to structure the reflections with the use of various questions. And another question, what do you see as the special strengths of this paper? Their answers include, it shows that I am able to write a good piece that is unique to me. The use of many references. The correct use of grammar. Okay, so with these questions, the students are able to give their own reflections. And now, we can also have peer evaluations. These peer evaluations can be very helpful, especially when students are beginning to get used to the idea of self-reflection and you're trying to establish a trusting environment. The focus of peer evaluation is on analysis and the constructive supportive criticism of the strategies, the styles, and the other concrete aspects of the product or the portfolio. We have here some examples of questions to ask for this more comprehensive self-reflection. These questions involve, or it may include, how do you think your writing has changed this year? What have you learned this year about how to write? And what new things did you learn this year about writing? And here is an example of elementary student self-reflection adapted from Macmillan 2018. So we have an incomplete statement here where the student is required to complete this statement. We have the first statement, this piece was selected because, and the student's answer, I was happy with it and my handwriting is good. The next statement, this piece is good because it shows that I can write. Next statement, one thing I learned from doing this piece was that if I try harder, I can do well. And the last incomplete statement, what I would do to make the piece better, make it longer. So with these incomplete statements, students are able to structure or construct their own self-reflections. Student reflections may also include the comments or review by the parents. One advantage of using portfolios is that it is well suited to parent involvement. However, the beginning of the year, we need to inform the parents about what portfolios are and how they can participate in the creation of portfolios of their children. Students can also consult their parents when selecting work samples, and parents can give comments or help the students or the children reflect on the work that they have done. Parents can continuously provide advice and encouragement to their children. And parents can also complete a form or answer a specific set of questions. And then students can incorporate the parent comments and suggestions into their own reflection. And the next step is the teacher evaluation and feedback. Teachers evaluate the contents of the portfolio with the following. First one is the checklist of contents. We can use a simple checklist as a summary to ensure that the contents of the portfolio are complete. And these checklists tend to be brief. However, for teachers and schools, checklists typically are more comprehensive. Teachers can also evaluate the contents of the portfolio with the portfolio structure evaluation. These evaluations can help in gaining insights as to how well students have demonstrated the skill in completing the structural requirements. We can have aspects such as selection of samples, thoroughness, appearance, self-reflection, and organization. And these aspects can be evaluated using a rubric or assigning points to each aspect according to a scale. For example, we can assign 5 points for excellence in in a particular aspect and 1 for poor. Or we can also make written comments, or we can do both, assigning points and making written comments. We can also evaluate the contents of the portfolio with evaluations of individual entries. This can be accomplished with the scoring criteria and rubrics. It is important to provide sufficient feedback to students so that they know what has been done well or their strengths and what needs to be improved on or their weaknesses. And teachers can also evaluate the contents of the portfolio by evaluating the entire contents. We can have individualized written comments for each student. We can have the summary of their performance and progress, highlighting the changes that have occurred, their strengths, and the areas that need to be improved on. So rather than using terms such as unacceptable or inadequate, we can use terms such as improving, developing, partial, or even novice. It may also be helpful if comments are done using a sandwich approach, where we congratulate the students for the effort and the job that they have done, or we give appreciation to their work, or we can also cite their strengths. In other words, we start our comment with a positive note. Then we follow these comments with comments on areas that they need to improve on. And then we end our comment with how they can improve their weaknesses. Or we can end our comment with an encouraging comment or statement. And the last step in implementing portfolio assessment is conducting student-teacher conferences. It is where we review the contents, the students' reflections, and we have the evaluations of individual items and all the work as related to learning targets. Conferences with students should be scheduled throughout the year. It is suggested that for elementary students, we can have one conference each month. And early in the year, conferences can be used to clarify the purposes and the procedures used in our assessment. It is also can be an avenue to answer questions and to establish trust with the student. And it is best that students are given guidelines to prepare for each conference. And during the conference, we allow students to do most of the talking. How the students compare their reflections with your evaluations and make plans for subsequent work. Again, we can use the sandwich approach when presenting or discussing the students' strengths and weaknesses. And make sure that at the end of the conference, there is a plan of action for the future. We also limit the conference to no more than 10 or 15 minutes. You may want to have students to take notes about what was discussed in the conference, and you can also make your own brief notes. We have to focus on one or two major topics or areas at each conference. This helps ensure a full and thoughtful discussion rather than a superficial treatment of each or several areas. And here is a sample documentation portfolio implementation timeline that we can observe for each unit, semester, or year long. This is adapted from Macmillan 2018. For each unit, we can collect contents for 3 or 4 weeks. We can have the students reflect on contents 2 weeks prior to the end of the unit. And we can conduct conferences and grade their work at the last week. For the semester, we can collect contents for the entire semester. We can have students review contents at the end of each quarter. We can select 7 to 10 products or contents 3 to 4 weeks before the end of the semester. And we allow 1 week for students to reflect on the contents. And at the end, on the last week of the semester, we conduct conferences. And this is when we grade the student work. For year-long activities, we can have students collect contents over the entire year, review contents at the end of each quarter, students' reflections conducted at the end of each quarter, select final contents 4 weeks before the end of the school year, and conferences held last 3 weeks of the year, and grade the work of the students in the last week of the school year. And the key points that we have to remember in implementing portfolio assessment, we have to review with our students, supply content, have student self-evaluations, teacher evaluations, and conduct student-teacher conferences. Students should be meaningfully involved in the selection of work samples, and the contents should include the table of contents. And student-teacher conferences should be held throughout the year to review the progress of students and establish plans for them. And that ends our discussion on portfolio assessment. And here are the references used for this video. Thank you for watching and hope this video helps. Stay safe and healthy always, and see you in my next videos.